Good afternoon. It's Joyful Christian Hermit. I think I'm making progress with this second round of antibiotic. And still taking the Mucinex extra strength for lungs, or decongestant, whatever it was, expectorant, I guess. So, another day, more thoughts. Dr. H called, I think by accident. He called and left a message, Eric, call me back. And so I called, left a message that he ended up not getting, saying that, it wasn't Eric, it was me, and that Eric wouldn't be getting his message because he had called me instead. So he called again. It turns out that Eric is someone from there who moved to my area, this area, within the last week. So anyway, it's fluke kind of a situation. But at least I know Dr. H is alive and well, very, very busy. But we had a nice talk. Talked about suffering and love. And I explained to him why I think I talk so much when he does call, rather than doing more listening, is because these ideas stack up in me that I have no one else who is already sort of on that wavelength or would grasp it, who I can talk with back and forth, or who will listen and then make comments or ask questions, or also hoping he can utilize these ideas, these insights, with people that he works with who are terminal cases, or fearing death, or facing it, even if it's not imminent dying. So that was, and I think he understood that. However, there have been times, and he wanted to get me on to something, he wanted to hear something, because I mentioned something about what one of you viewers commented, giving a name for my triggers, my flashbacks, and how vivid they can be, and that it actually has caused a chemical alteration in my brain chemistry change. And I believe that. I believe my brain chemistry is altered from the type of abuse that I went through, that I lived with, and didn't realize it at the time, but increasingly would notice things. But by then, with an abuse, with a sociopath, you learn not to confront, because they really explode and you just don't know. They can be very erratic. You develop a fear that is not overt, but it's in there. Gets very psychological. So, but Dr. H wanted to know, because I said, there were so many things that would trigger now and then that I hadn't told him about over the years. He says, well, just name one of those. And because I realized what triggered me about the time that he got me wet when I was about 2 weeks away from due date with our second child. And then we were in this gas station. He was getting gas, and somehow somebody had left, it was before they had automatic shutoffs, but gas was flowing out all over the ground. And my then husband grabbed our little girl out of the car seat in the back seat. Thank God, I was grateful. But it registered that he wasn't helping me get out. And I had pulled my maternity pants down to the floor and my top up, because I didn't want the baby to be, I was chilled through and through. He intentionally had gotten me wet. He rode me into these fountains, just that my end where I was sitting in this rowboat at Wild Country Safari, or whatever it was called, in San Diego County. And he would just laugh and laugh. And I said, stop, please stop. It was cold. It was it was 1978. It was or 77, end of 77, and it was a very cold winter we were having, cold and gray day. And, I didn't know what was happening with, and then I ended up getting a terrible but more was a coughing, badly coughing, and I ended up having to take a prescription cough medicine and I worried that it was going to affect the baby somehow. It didn't, but not that I know of. She seems just great, but and at that late time probably not, but I was miserable. I couldn't even continue teaching. I was going to teach up to the day practically, and because I was only teaching half days, but I couldn't. I was so sick. But he did that, and then there I was in the car, and he said, get out, it's going to blow up, And I'm sure it was this truck in Las Vegas in the United States that blew up the other day. Probably to the day, I bet. Well, that was New Year's Day. We were there between Christmas and New Year's at the Wild, but it was the same time period, and I think that exploding vehicle, they had gas cans in back, I think that triggered that memory, that horrible memory. And that was one of the first times that I overtly knew. I mean, I knew this man doesn't love me, but I shoved it down. I sublimated it. And then I got sick. See, and I'm sick now, so I have a lot of connections. So it's, no, I can't put all of it in a box. I want to, but things happen that bring it up. And now this viewer explained to me, that it actually altered my brain chemistry. These things trigger like that because my brain chemistry is altered, and I believe that. So, but my thing is to move through it and move on to love of God, love of others, pray. When I get those, I pray for the ex-husband. I pray for anything surrounding it. I send love, and I forgive. And then I do the same for myself, for staying with it. The power of wedding vows. And also my father had a beautiful wedding for us. And I thought of all the family and the friends in our hometown. And it's just hard to get out of it, to get out of that wedding, out of that marriage. So things happen. We pray, we love, we forgive, and then we move on and live our lives. So, I have another flashback, though, and it's not really a flashback, but it's regarding the devil and how real is the devil and how the devil can take over, get involved in us. And this is something that happened to my son. His end of his senior year in college, after he graduated, I had a very lucid dream vision. And in it, my son came to me. And he was just begging me, Mom. He was the age of his graduating from college. And he said, please help me. And he had his shirt up. And he showed me his back. He said, help my back. Look at my back. He was frantic. And I looked at his back in this vision dream. And his back was loaded with boils. His whole back. And he said, help me, Mom, help me. And I said, you've got to see a doctor. I said, I can't get these off. They were all over his back. Boils. Red. And of course, he hadn't had things like that in life. So I said, you need to see a doctor. And he says, I can't. He says, I let go of my insurance. He was frantic. He was then 23 years old in real life and in this dream vision. And I said, why would you do that? Why would you let go your insurance? Well, I think was my mother still, she might have been still alive, but it was the whole idea. And he said, I just did, and can't you help me? That was the end of it. And then I woke up, and immediately I knew what that dream meant. I knew, because it had only been about a year before, or a year and a half before, God had shown me my mother, who had gotten into New Age and was determined with it, got into the Course in Miracles and into New Age, a group in Arizona. And it started, somebody from her church, her Methodist church, had introduced her to this group. So, you know, people in churches get trapped in these things. My mother got into it, got ensnared. And it was not a good group. And I talk a little bit more about that some other time. But my sisters and I, we were all on the same page. We had to get her out of it. She had lost her Christianity. Plus, she was being influenced by them and giving them money too, donations. They expected it. And this man was doing treatments and promising her he could heal her lungs. She had pulmonary fibrosis. No way could he heal her lungs. But he was doing weird treatments that were going to cause her to get sick. So I got through to her doctor, and her doctor listened to me, and my mother respected her doctor, and her doctor put a stop to the treatments. God, or don't do those things. You're going to make yourself sick and be very bad off. So, but she still was linked, but we got her away. But I was shown the condition of my mother's soul. And she was like red. Her skin was red all over except for one patch on this cheek here. And my mother had beautiful skin, none of the dark marks that I've got. So beautiful, and no wrinkles. She, at 86 and a half, when she passed, her skin she looked like she was 65, other than very, very thin. But so anyway, I recognized, though, that all that red, that my son, that it was the devil. The devil had that much of my son, and that the insurance my son had given up was the church and God. He had given up his insurance. And because in real life he had insurance, see, so. But all of it was just very clear when I woke up. And I was horrified, because it took a lot of praying, a lot of talking, being with my mother daily. We got her away from Arizona back to her hometown. My sisters, all her kids were all praying. We were all praying. I would spend nights in a all-night chapel praying, and just really intense and intently. And I was still worn out from my mother's past. I guess she had passed, worn out from that. But I really started praying. I told other people, please pray, please pray. It's not like I can tell people what I saw. It would be goofy, but I did tell a couple of good friends. But it doesn't affect others like it did when you have an experience like that. Some of you who do, it is so gripping and so real talk about love to suffer and suffer to love. I loved and love my son. And that was horrifying. And I knew he was in serious trouble. I knew that from how he was treating me in real life, his behavior at his graduation and baccalaureate. He refused to go to baccalaureate with me, but it was okay. He went to a Catholic university, small one, in upstate New York, and it had an excellent journalism department. He got an excellent education, but he lost his Catholic faith his junior year with a required course on Catholicism, and the friar who taught it was Franciscan University, who taught it, chose this book called Catholicism, written by, I think it was a Father William McBride. He was a priest from Notre Dame, but he was a dissenter priest. He's deceased. But he somehow, that friar chose that textbook, that book, as a textbook. And it's a dissenting type of book on Catholicism. And it so upset my son that it confused him. He decided that his religion priest teacher at his Catholic high school that he loved that high school. He really respected that priest. At one point in time, even prayed about if he should become a priest. And he said they lied to him. Everybody that I had lied to him about Catholicism became very angry. To this day, accuses me of getting him into Catholicism, and that Catholicism is terrible. Every priest molests little boys. He just repeats that rancid. But back then, he was so upset because of this book. It totally threw him off. He was a very idealistic person like me. He was very strong Catholic, very, very intent, very sincere, and that just totally confused. The author of confusion, that's the devil. And that book, and the friar that taught it used that book. And so my son stopped going to Mass, and that was it. For how he did not stay with Catholicism. And his baccalaureate, who they had preach, wasn't even a Christian person. And they did a mockery, a terrible way at baccalaureate. I went to the Mass. He refused to go. My son wouldn't go with me. He got very nasty to me at his graduation. His father flew in. I was the one that was paying the extra for his college and for my girls' college. The husband never helped financially. But the dad flew in, and it was a drink. They did a lot of drinking in that school. I had no idea it would be like that. No supervision, no stopping it. Just very disappointing for me, obviously, and the cost of it. And he had loans, he had grants and scholarships also. Then I had a big loan I paid off for 10 years. But, and then later I found out it was sort of an iffy in the faith Catholic university. So the next year after that, well, my son was really put out with me, and he would, did he call me even? I don't know. His dad moved in on the situation then from that graduation weekend on through till now even. I didn't realize. So between that and the class and that textbook, the book Catholicism by this McBride, this priest, my son lost his faith and he lost his insurance. He chose to, but it's awfully hard when you're a young person and you were so idealistic in your faith, and then you hear these things, these questionable things, and by people that you're trusting at your university, and then you lose your faith. I wrote to the president, this nun, who was the president of the university at the time, but she didn't care. And I had admitted that, yes, there were other students who didn't lose their faith. But I wrote, why would you use a textbook like that? Why would you have this Jewish politician, very liberal, preach at baccalaureate? It's a mass. This man, sort of a famous politician, Jewish man, at this Catholic university, preached the homily. Of course, it wasn't about Christ. And then how they distributed communion, it was terrible, shameful. He just handed baskets of hosts down the rows in this auditorium. People could have stuffed their pockets with them, used them for demonic rituals or something. I couldn't believe it. So I brought this up in a letter. And I said, yes, my son lost his faith and is accusing his mother of lying to him about Catholicism, and all of his high school teachers and the priests in his high school. When it was that friar and that horrible book that was lying to my son. But I said, yes, he chose to lose his faith. I mean, I was honest about that, but under what circumstances? And the drinking, I addressed that. I didn't think I'd sent my son to an alcoholic school, just terrible. And he'd been taught not to drink. But runs in my family, and he got hooked. Then my ex comes for that graduation, unbeknownst to me, and was up all night with these kids, drinking. This great superintendent, my ex-husband, rolls in. So it just was this vision then with my son and his whole back, just a mass of red boils. Then the next year, in fact, this vision happened during Mass when I was in ecstasy. Or no, this one was another dream vision. I had a third time when I was in Mass in 2008 after the ecstasies began. But this second one was another. And my son's skin was totally aflame with red all over, except for a clear patch left on his right hand, top of his right hand. And he was flailing with pain and agony, and there was nothing I could do but pray. So after that vision, I shared again, this time just with this couple friend that I'd shared before. I bet they don't remember. Things like this don't sink into other people. If it were their son and they had seen that, it would. I understand this. When you share a vision with others, it's too hard. But some of you have these things. One of you recently mentioned just this past few days of being shown hell and demons and people taken over and the horror of it. and how once you see it, once you know, you never forget. Listen, I understand. I don't think I wrote back emphasizing that aspect, that I believe what she saw and I relate with it and know how horrific these things are. In fact, one of the New Age people trying to take over my mother when she was in Arizona and was succeeding with it. I'd had a dream the night before she was going to meet with this woman for her Course in Miracles little group. And only this woman showed up, but I had this dream. And I told my mother about it. And I said, this woman was in the dream. And you were with me, Mom. But I said, this woman kept grabbing at me and trying to pull me into this, like outside of a little hut she had, or a little house or something. And I said, and on her finger was this ring with a serpent, a big serpent that went down on top of this ring. And I said it was just horrifying. And my mother said, because my mother understood that I had dreams, and she would sometimes call me with her dreams that she couldn't understand, and knew I could help her. We would help each other with dreams. And she says, that's the devil. And she says, I'm telling you, if you ever see that woman in real life, stay away from her. I said, oh, I will. Well, so we were having lunch at her lovely retirement place in Arizona. They served lunches there. You could order from the menu and stuff. Very nice place she had. She and my dad had worked hard and deserved to live in a nice place. My dad had passed already there. So, but she was ill then. And I was out there trying to help her because she did not want to leave yet. Didn't want to go back to the Midwest yet, to a home there where I could help her all the time. I was just there. I was going to try to stay there, but it turned out I couldn't. I had to get back and ride herd on my son between his sophomore and junior year in college. Or maybe, yeah, it's between that year. So check on him. And sure enough, kids from high school had come and they'd had a big party. So, it wasn't going to work out. But in the meantime, my mom didn't want me to come back because she told their director there that I was interfering with her friends. Well, this is what happened. We go back to her apartment after that lunch, after I told her about that horrifying dream. And there's a knock at the door. And she has oxygen tank. She says, oh, could you please go get it? It's probably so-and-so, the woman that was coming with this Course in Miracles. And so I opened the door, and who should it be? The woman from the dream. I kid you not. Ring and all. So she comes in. She knows my mom. She's been there before. My mom introduces me. My mom wanted me to stay just to see what it was like. And I didn't want to, obviously, but I thought, I'm not leaving my mom alone with this woman, even though I realized they were friends. But I stayed, and they were going over something in this Course in Miracles, and it has it has scripture in it, but it twists it. And I point, of course, you guys know me by now, some of you who listen long enough. I'm bold, and I would point out things. And amazingly, my mother would say, well, yes, that's right. It doesn't really say that, does it? It's not using that scripture correctly. It happened to be something from the Old Testament at the time. But the woman was arguing and doing the double speak. They just talk and try to twist it around to get you brainwashed, in essence, duped. Well, she was taken over by the devil, obviously, or had a great deal of linkage. So my mother, though, she stood up for her. She said, well, no. And this woman kept trying to convince her, and she says, but no, my mom, but no, look, it doesn't say that. But it wasn't enough. So the woman left, and I told Mom. I said, have you ever noticed your friend's ring? I said, Mom, that's the woman from my dream. And I said, I think you ought to get away from this totally. And I had to be careful with my mother. We all knew it because you don't just tell her. We were very much her kids, her children, and she was the boss. So, but I did say that, and I said, I will not be here again when she's here, if she comes back. I said, I cannot stay in the same room. I have to protect myself, my own soul. But she went ahead with it. So the next week, the woman came for their meeting, and I left, and my mom wasn't happy about that at all, that I wouldn't stay. But no way. Mm-mm. But so that was partly why my mother told, when I went back to check on the son for a week, and I got a call from the director, and the director said, your mother doesn't want you coming back because you interfere with her friends. Well, my mom knew. She knew. But the devil didn't want my interference there. So, anyway, these things are real. But with my son, then I had a third time, but it was just, I was in Mass, in ecstasy at the cathedral, there in the Midwest, probably 2 years after that, because the first would have been in 2006, the second in 2007. I think the third was in 2008. And the ecstasy was just horrific. I was in a hell in that ecstasy. And Reverend Monsignor could tell. Later on, he said something. He says, what was going on? He said, your body was making all these movements, and you looked like you were in terrible distress. And I told him, I said I was being shown my son again. I had already told him, he was my confessor at the time. The spiritual daw was still my spiritual daw, and I told him. And they all just said, well, just keep praying, keep praying. But I couldn't keep up the intensity of prayer, of that kind of praying I had done for my mother. And I asked other people to pray, but I don't think people understand the devil and how horrific. And so, and my son, he would be off and on, back and forth with me. He was nice, he co-signed so I could do the island place, so that I could get a place to go to first before selling my house. And that was because if I needed to, I could take my trees out there, all this investment I could take. And I didn't want to get stuck, without a place. And so he kindly co-signed, but he got very angry then when immediately when I got to the island, there was a problem with a neighbor who wanted to take over part of the property through a loophole law that King County, Seattle has called adverse possession. If they can claim that they mowed the grass for 10 years, or say they did, they just file a paper in court and that portion of land becomes theirs, even though you've paid for it and you continue paying taxes on it. And when you sell your property, that portion belongs to the neighbor who claims it's theirs through adverse possession. Well, he claimed that he had mowed that and taken care of that, and he'd even put a fence up on my property. I had it because I needed a deer fence put in the realtor hadn't told me they had a deer problem out there. And all of my specimen trees would have just been decimated in a day, eaten by the deer. So especially the tender old Japanese maples, they love them. And all the flowers, the flowering trees. So I had to put a deer fence in. I put it on the line, and that's when I had a person come, a surveyor. I found out this man had put a fence up on my property. He was preparing. The woman before me was very ill, very elderly, and he took advantage of her. She didn't know what he was doing out there with part of her property, but it was costly. I wasn't going to just let him have it. So these men got the fence up before he had a chance to get over to the courthouse on the 8 a.m. ferry. These men came like at 7:30 and started putting the fence in right on that area. They told the man, and he'd put an electric fence in too. And they said to him, either you take this electric fence out, or I'm cutting it with my bolt cutters. And he had big rubber gloves and rubber boots on so he wouldn't get electrocuted. We're shocked. And so that's what he did. He bolt cutted it and tore it out because the man wasn't going to. He was angry. And those people, yeah, they were very angry with me. But they were pulling it and taking advantage of me. And that it upset me so much when I got there and realized I left a bad neighbor in the Midwest, had to move because of that crazy neighbor, and here I was, a devil right at it again. But I succeeded with that. I didn't care if they didn't speak to me. I was used to that with the other neighbor in Midwest. I couldn't speak to her. No way. She was threatening my life and just nuts. Seriously crazy. But demonic. She did a lot of demonic things. So, but not a demoniac. I don't think. I think she was just severely oppressed, but close to possessed. If not, but if possessed, it was a mild, not as bad as the woman in France. But anyway, the devil is real. And so my son then became very angry over the situation. Plus, I found out it was a teardown and all this stuff needed to be done. And the island people were trying to bilk me, of course. So I ended up having to, but God provided a man on the mainland at the Pro Build. I think it's called Builders Pro Source now in Fife. He just retired in August, but Craig, I went there, and of course I'd go places, I'd just break down in tears because I didn't have money to get that place fixed up. And it was bad. Rain coming in through the roof, rain coming in through the walls, rat infested, raccoon infested, bird infested. The realtor happened to be a Catholic, got in an inspector who I later found out none of the realtors used because he was bad. In fact, he'd lost his license by the time I sold, but intentionally, obviously, just to make the sale. So he didn't disclose things. She would have known. She was like a top realtor, had been president of the Realtors Board off and on, and her husband too. So well-known realtors and on the island. And I don't think she even realized what she does. I think it's just part of her way of selling. But people couldn't believe it that she had sold that place to me. But I didn't know it was a gorgeous piece of property. But I got that thing turned around by the grace of God. And even my spiritual DAW sent me money, quite a bit of money. My son refused to co-sign we could have co-signed for not a swing loan, but remodeling loan at low interest, but he refused. He wouldn't speak to me then, and he wrote some terrible emails to me, and I kept two of them, and as a reminder, in case I ever needed to be reminded of what's in him, if he gets pushed or if he gets ticked, and things weren't going well with any of my kids then. I think they blame me for these situations I get into. And I'll take some of the blame, but they don't understand the devil. And of course the devil's battling on me, beating on me. I'm a problem to the devil, evidently. And I'm not good with the world. I know that. And now, I'm convinced. But this Craig taught me everything I needed to know. He said he would, because I just burst into tears when I went there. I thought, well, I'll get some wood, try to frame in some windows. Had beautiful view. And try to do, learn something like that. I hired a man hourly on the island. It turned out he was on drugs and wasn't any good, didn't know how to use a level straight, couldn't read it right. So I needed, windows have to be exact or they don't open right. So I had to let him go, but this man said, I'm teaching you. I'll teach you everything. And I'm giving you, he says, I'm going to call it a homeowner's discount. So Craig taught me everything I needed to know. And a man at Lowe's in Tacoma taught me how to do plumbing. So, but it took 5.5 years. But wow, the devil can do stuff. But then when you meet someone good, like Craig, the man at this Builder's Pro Source, wonderfully holy, God-centered man, and the other workers there too. So it took 5.5 years, but I got out of there and did very well financially from it. And it looked beautiful too. It was gorgeous by the time finished with it. And there were miracles there. So constantly there's the devil and then there's God, and keep going. But my son, please pray for him. He has since gotten married, and the wedding, I was told about it, and shameful, sad. Her parents are Catholic, and the wedding was a mockery of Catholicism in particular. Somebody told me about it and said it was a good thing I wasn't there, and said how upset her parents were, how deeply wounded and upset, but tried not to show it. But my son and his new bride and all their friends just thought it was a riot. Blasphemous it was. And lots of drinking and wild dancing, drinking till they were skunk drunk. And then went on to an all-night dancing and more drinking. And he and his dad were, before he had me helping, was going to help with different things. But then he told me no. And then he cut me off totally 2 years ago this month, January. And didn't invite me to the wedding, but somebody told me it was as well that I didn't. And the way it was described to me, I wouldn't have been able to have stayed there. I would not have wanted to offend Christ that way, or any church. But I it's the devil is worse after all these years. And I have to tell you honestly, I don't pray and pray and pray with fervor. I'm worn out. And I even know that my son he may be in hell for eternity. And I don't say that lightly. I'm not one to say, oh, we're going to go to hell, this one and that one. But what I saw like 17 years ago, 2006, was that 18 years now? And the next year, worse, taken over all of his skin, except for this right hand clear patch. What is it now? What's left of him? I don't even know. So other than I did find out from a cousin that he has a different job, then I found out that a lot of people were laid off, and he was one of them. But at the time when I heard about what he did with that wedding and had his friends officiated and knew his hatred of Catholicism, his viciousness, and of course has always blamed me. And which is just illogical, obviously, and extreme. This is all so extreme. Even why he cut me off was an extreme reaction, not a mature or healthy or sensible one. So, and that's the devil, the author of confusion and chaos, ugliness and evil. But I thought at the time, some of his bosses, immediate bosses, would be at that wedding. And what would they think of someone 40 years old doing that? Even if they weren't Christian, even. How immature. How rude. And her parents paid a lot of money toward that wedding because they felt it needed to be really something because of his job and the people at his work coming. That needed to be impressive. But imagine just all the booze and what it cost. And he had told me his father was going to have some cocktail hours the night before, which usually the groom's mom and dad host evening before dinner, groom's dinner. And I had offered to help with that, but oh no, my dad and I are doing it. My dad's doing it. And I understand he grew up basically away from his dad and, has developed this fantasy or whatever. And now since college has been very attached. I didn't realize how much. But it was going to be a cocktail and a hors d'oeuvres at some expensive place. 57th floor of some iconic building in Manhattan. And then my daughter said, well, that never happened. I thought, oh, that figures, because the ex, he's cheap. I wondered, I thought, wow, he's going to really do this, But no, he reneged. Just like he reneged on helping my son with a swing loan for his apartment. Finally, he was going to buy an apartment instead of blowing money on rent. And he had called me. This was maybe 6 or 7 years ago. And finally said that he was going to do it. I was thrilled. I'd been trying to get him to invest for a long time rather than blowing money on rent. But I didn't push him much. I knew he was hesitant. He worries some. So And he wasn't awful to me all the time. There were many times of much goodness, but other times, like when I got little mercy, and I mentioned it, and he just flipped out. That was, I think, another email I kept just to remind myself of the devil in him. So I was having electronic interference. So I'm getting into nitty-gritty of the evil. Anyway, my son was the most spiritual of my children from an early age. I'm not overemphasizing or exaggerating. At 3 years old, it was uncanny, the things he would say. And at age 4, he saw the Holy Spirit. At 9, he became a godly in the middle of the night. He's very loving, sensitive, beautiful, dark child, sweet, generous, giving, and yet, when the devil got in, including with the drinking, and he lost his faith, and he turned against God. So please pray for him. I consider myself just linked up to God like wire, and all of my pain and suffering of all types flows and it's hooked with God, and for God to use however and for whomever. But it seems that I just don't know what more to pray for my son. And there will be consequences, I know that. I have consequences for my sins. Even for my foolhardiness, for my lack of common sense. So, I have to rely on God's grace and also to accept that my son may be doomed for eternity. And it got to the point where it's okay that he cut me off, because I'm not interested in being mistreated again. And heredity being as it is, when he would be ugly on the phone, and he didn't want to visit me, but he did fly out when I had the head injury, and was wonderful, and so loving and sweet, and even apologized to me for how he'd been regarding that violent place, which meant a lot. So he's got a beautiful soul, and that's what the devil can do. Just in case any of you have any doubts or don't realize, God is real, but the devil is too. So I'll stop talking. Even my computer doing the screen it did it the other night when I started discussing the love. So something in caring. God blesses your presence in us and the person's story.